Hey everybody, Coach Stephen here from CrossFit State of Line. Welcome back to our final installment of Making Macros Work. Today we're going to hopefully tie everything back together, tie up any loose ends, and hopefully answer any questions that you might have about this whole timing thing that we've been talking about the entire time. So, to reiterate from our last video, this is coming from an angle of body composition and performance in the gym, right? Again, more healthy diets that you can choose, more diets that can, do all sorts of different types of things. Let's lean out, let's set some PRs. So with that said, the graph that I would show people, or the little pyramid that I always draw everybody whenever I meet with any of my macros clients, looks like this. And again, this is how we want to kind of prioritize things as we move into counting macros and tracking all this stuff. So at the very bottom, we have calories. Calories are king. If you eat less calories than you put out, you're going to lose weight, always. If you eat more calories than you put out, then you're always going to gain weight. Most people generally find a middle ground. We call it a eucaloric state where, week after week, month after month, you're not gaining or losing much weight, maybe a pound here, maybe a pound there, one way or the other. But most people find a way, your body wants to find a way to put out as much as it's taking in, or to take in as much as you're putting out. In general, when people increase their activity level, if they're not tracking their food, they also tend to increase their total number of calories that they're taking in, and it makes, losing weight through exercise a very difficult thing. So controlling through calories is super important. From there, how we distribute our macros is very important, right? We all know this. Carbs, fats, proteins. Can't just have protein, can't just have carbs, can't just have fats. We need to have an equal distribution. We're not an equal distribution, but a distribution that's going to work for all of us based on your lean body mass and your goals like that. Most people end up somewhere around 40 carbs, 30 fat, and 30 protein, but it's very specialized, very unique for everybody and their goals. So if you haven't worked with a coach before, work with a coach. If you're not exactly sure where you should be, check in with a coach. We can help you out with that. After that, we have basically what we've been talking about this entire time, which is timing. When do we want to get some of this stuff in? How are we going to control our hormones, insulin, glucagon response when we take in protein? How are we going to control all this stuff to benefit us rather than have it work against us? And as we saw in our carbohydrate video, even if you're doing the macros part really well, there are some things that you can do with timing that can work against you if you're doing it, sort of the total opposite way of what we want. So timing is important, but again, not as important as macros, not as important as calories. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. The last thing, we're not going to touch on this too much, is food quality and supplements. I find food quality to be a, certainly kind of an interesting piece in this. Places like Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, organic places, shops, basically build their entire empire off of food quality is the most important thing. They advertise a healthy lifestyle and all these things, and I think a lot of people do feel like if they switch to healthier foods and whole foods, they will lose weight and all these things. It's just not necessarily the case because all these other things do take precedent. Food quality, absolutely important. And again, if you're focused on health, there's probably going to be better choices of foods that you could work towards. We could talk about all that stuff in a later series of videos some other time, right? Supplements is not including protein supplements. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. So I'm not talking about casein, and I'm not talking about whey protein. Those are pretty much fitting within our macros description. This is more fish oil, creatine. There's a million different supplements out there, right? So that's at the very, very top. I wouldn't worry about that stuff too much unless all this stuff is dialed in. So we're gonna come back to this, but let's look at what a 24-hour period could look like on macros. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay out a full day. I'm gonna do today. I worked out at noon, so I'm just gonna kind of build this off of a noon workout. If you work out way late at night or really early in the morning, this is gonna be a little bit different for you, but I think you can kind of, you can figure out where we're coming from with all this stuff. So, we're gonna assume an 8-hour sleeping window. If we go to bed at 10 p.m., we're waking up at 6 a.m., that's 8 hours. You should be getting 8 hours of sleep. You should at least try, everybody, especially you 5:30 a.m. workout people who should try to be getting 8 hours of sleep. But we're gonna say we're getting 8 hours of sleep. So this is my day, right? I've got 16 hours of food to kind of think about. Where am I gonna distribute this stuff? I'm gonna start with my carbohydrates, since it sort of just tends to be the biggest, it's the biggest thing that we tend to think about as we get into timing of macros and all these types of things. So let's start with carbohydrates. If I'm gonna work out at noon, about 1 hour before that, I'm gonna get my first little bit of carbohydrate. We talked about this before. About an hour before, let's go ahead and return those blood sugar levels up back to good levels, maybe kind of top off our glucose levels a little bit. So I'm gonna have, 20 to 30 grams carbs, CHO, carbohydrate, about an hour before my workout. Do my workout at noon, so at 1 p.m., I'm going to get my post-workout shake. Post-WOD shake. And again, here we're looking at 30 to 40% of our daily carbohydrate intake immediately post-workout. 30 to 40%. It's going to be different for everybody depending on what your numbers are, but 30 to 40% of carbohydrate immediately post-workout. If you can get this in an entirely liquid form, I think that's best, but there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. Moving on, as we discussed before, we've got about a 4-hour post-workout eating window to get the other carbohydrates in. So let's say that I have 40% of my carbohydrate here. I'm going to get about 30% of my carbohydrates moving forward about for this 4-hour window. So this is kind of my main carbohydrate window, and this is going to take up 70 to 80%, including this pre-workout carbohydrate, of my daily carbohydrate. So that's going to leave me about 20 to 30% of my daily carbohydrate for here in this really post-workout area. If this was a noon workout, at 4 p.m. is kind of that cutoff. So from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., we're looking at dinner and then maybe a snack before I go to bed, right? Low-grade carbohydrates. Vegetables, bag of vegetables, broccoli, spinach, any of these types of things. You can kind of pour that stuff on, use a lot of it, eat a lot of it, and still not affect that carbohydrate number a lot. So we do start looking at, fats and fibers in this area. We also look at before this. So wake up until that, until about 11 a.m. I'm pretty much sticking to fats, fibers, vegetables. So on the subject of fats, as we know, during this period, and we've got now about a 5-hour window here, we're pretty much avoiding fat and fiber a lot. Talking about fat now, this is where we're going to try to pack most of this in. We're going to get a lot of this in here. I don't want you to be hungry throughout the day, right? The goal is not to be hungry at all. So we wake up 6 a.m. What I did this morning, I didn't wake up at 6 a.m. I woke up at like 8 a.m., but that's what you get. Today's my day off, so that's what you get. But I woke up at 6 a.m., so at about 7 a.m. or so, I have my breakfast. And I'm not going to use purple anymore because I use that for purple. Purple now represents carbs. So we're going to say brown is going to be my fats. And I have my first meal probably about 7 a.m. And that meal has 50% of my daily fat intake. Right? I think that's pretty cool. So I get about 90 grams of fat. So I had 4 eggs, 4 strips of bacon, and about 2 tablespoons of half and half in my coffee. So I take about 50% of my daily fat intake at that first meal. I didn't eat again until this pre-workout carbohydrate. Not hungry at all. Right now, it's almost 3 o'clock, so I've had some of this. I'm not hungry at all. I've got another hour to get a little bit of carbohydrate in me before I kind of stop eating the day. I'm gonna have one more big meal. So I've been able to kind of fend off that hunger all day. So we're going a lot of fat and protein here, and then we're getting the remainder of our fat in this window before the end of the day. Protein is the last one, and as we discussed earlier, especially if we're combining protein with our fat, then we can pretty much guarantee a pretty good long amino acid drip here. After my workout, we're getting protein in that shake, and we're gonna say that's no, purple's carb. Blue is protein. We're gonna say about 20 to 30 grams protein post-workout with that shake. So you're going to get that good amino acid drip in there. Now again, this is probably going to be a whey protein shake. It's going to clear the GI tract in less than an hour. So that next meal we want to get fairly soon, and we want that to be fairly protein heavy as well. That should take us on later into the day. Once we get to about dinner, we have protein again with a little bit of, now we have fats, we've got some fibrous vegetables, so we can kind of get that going for the rest of the day. And then at the very end of our day, if I'm going to bed at 10 p.m., at about 9:30, I'm going to have my last little bit of protein for the day. This is when I'm going to have my casein shake. Again, casein takes about 8 hours to fully digest. So I avoid any level of catabolism, any digestion of my own muscle tissue to repair any other muscle tissue by making readily available amino acids in my bloodstream. So I take that last slow digesting protein before I go to bed, and that pretty much takes me into my next day. So that's kind of how we want to distribute these 3 macros over the course of the day. Carbs right around your workout, fats and fiber kind of away from our workouts, furthest from our workout, and protein at very steady intervals throughout the day, making an emphasis on fast protein post-workout and slow digesting protein before we go to bed. Now, obviously, we don't all work out at noon. Some of us work out in the morning, which is going to mean that we're going to have a much more carbohydrate-heavy morning, and then you might kind of split things off into 2 phases here, or you work out later at night. And basically, the idea would just be you were just weaning carbohydrates as we get away from the workout, getting more heavily into fats. The thing that I always go back to is carbs and fats are a sliding scale, right? So as there's going to be less carbohydrate in your meals, there's going to be more fat and fiber. As there's less fat and fiber in your meals, there's going to be more carbohydrate. And that's just the basic rule of thumb that we want to keep track of. So that is timing. The last thing that I really want to talk about here is a phrase that keeps coming to my mind as I'm talking about all this stuff, because we are diving fairly deep into the minutia, is don't let the perfect kill the good. I believe, my experience with this has been when I time my macros, I have a much easier time hitting my macros throughout the day. I get my calories spot on, I'm never ending up with excess fat, I'm never hungry, I'm never struggling to get that protein number in. I find it much easier when I focus on timing, but there are days that we're not perfect. And so I do think when we kind of go down this rabbit hole and we climb this pyramid and we get into, okay, now I know I'm only supposed to have my carbohydrates post-workout. Well, what if, number one, you're not working out that day, which, ask a coach, that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. Ask a nutrition coach that you're working with. But what if my workout wasn't that great today, or what if I just did cardio? What if I missed my post-workout shake? What do I do now? I say always feel comfortable backtracking down this thing. I live somewhere in between macros and timing, so I don't always do this perfectly. I'm not always timing all of this out very well, and there are days where I get to the end of the day and I've got, I worked out at noon and it's 9 o'clock and I've still got 100 plus grams of carbohydrate. Get your carbohydrates in. Eat the food. It's still more important than the timing, right? Don't let the perfect kill the good. If everything is all out of whack, and you're just like, I'm all over the place and things have just been crazy today, I didn't have a fatty breakfast, or I had oatmeal in breakfast and I worked out later and it's just been all over the place, don't say F it, right? Keep going and focus on hitting that calorie number. You can always backtrack. If our goal is to increase body composition and performance in the gym, the baseline is calories. So if you're not having a good day, you can always take a step back. Encompassing all this, I would say, even if it's another layer below it, or if we're going, this is encompassing all of this, is compliance, right? This stuff's great. All this stuff's really, really great. It works. It's the science. As long as your numbers are set up well, which if you worked with some of our coaches, your numbers are set up to reflect your goals. All of this works. It works very, very well. But it only works if you're being compliant. And compliance is over days and weeks and months and hopefully years, right? We want to be able to make this sustainable. So great if you've got a day where you timed everything out perfectly. On Monday I did everything perfectly, and on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday I kind of did it a little bit. I didn't really track my numbers, and on Friday I kind of got back on, and the weekend's totally a wash. Well, that's not really being compliant. That's having a couple days of doing macros well. I'd much rather have you do all of your days just hitting your calories. So focus on, make the most important thing the most important thing. Eat the right amount of food. If you can do that with some consistency, distribute your macros appropriately. If you can do that and that's not a problem, you want to hone in on it a little bit more, then start timing out those macros. If you guys have any questions, I really do, I hope you guys have a lot of questions, please ask, comment below, post any questions. If you guys have suggestions for other videos that you'd like to see in the future, or anything else you want us to talk about, please let us know. Thank you so much for all your time. I know this has all been long videos. I really appreciate it. Love you guys so much. Talk to you soon.